Welcome to those who just joined us. We are so grateful to be gathered here with Orlando Bishop, a spiritual teacher and the founder of Shade Tree Foundation, whose work brings together ancestral wisdom, social healing, and sacred intention.
Welcome.
Hello, Orlando.
Welcome.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
And with Francis Weller, a psychotherapist and soul activist whose work with grief and ritual has opened space for thousands to feel more whole. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. Thank you both. So good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
You both hold or carry such a deep medicine for this time. So it's such an honor to sit with you.
Yeah.
In this strange virtual space that bleeds into real life and our bodies and weaves us into this, remind us that we are part of the mystery of life that comes in so many different vibrations. And now it's in this vibration through the screen. I wonder, Orland, would you be open to guide us through invocation, or Francis, a prayer, anything to open the space together?
To you, brother.
Thank you. I'm carrying the song that was just offered, and also the deep gratitude to what preceded this conversation that we're now to share, to that which is living in all of those streams of expressions. We gather ourselves in deep reverence for what is alive in our world, in our time, and the struggle to stay within the truthfulness of our own integrity to that. I want to invoke the will of each person who has served to make this community a living space for the ancestral work to keep evolving through our efforts and through the love that we are to share for the futures that are to come from the personal and collective sacrifices that have been made. May this earth confirm that our life mattered in this time, and may the trees, the waters, and all life flow from this moment forward. Ashe.
Francis, do you have any words you want to share before I ask a question?
I would just echo the same sentiment of gratitude that, decades ago when I began talking about grief, there were very few on the screen or in the room. So it's heartening to feel the robust response of people's willingness to talk about loss and sorrow and grief and love for our beloved planet and for each other. So I'm filled with gratitude just to be here with Orland and with you. It's good. It's good.
Orland, you often speak of history as an initiation process, as an unfolding that shapes the soul through rupture and remembrance. And Francis, you speak a similar way. In that light, what becomes possible when we relate to history not as a chronology or as a traumatic events, but as a sacred doorway for transformation, for reshaping? And when when history becomes kind of a living, not a fixed identity, but something that we become. It's a very radical not radical. It's a deep invitation to sit, especially in the film. We go deep into the impact of colonialism on indigenous communities around the world, and how do we walk and feel that invitation to see history as initiation and history in that moment as well.
Please, Francis.
Well, there's two threads that I want to just touch upon. One is the thread that I felt watching the film. I've seen it twice now, and what I was left with was a profound sorrow, witnessing the tragedies, the traumas, the injuries, the wounds. But I was also simultaneously sensing the eternal song that was available for many of these cultures to reunite with those imaginal realities so that the healing would become possible. What I felt in my body was a profound grief that people from my ancestry forgot the song. So we're living in this time of amnesia, this time of the deep forgetting. And part of our grief is what we have forgotten. So the history is evidenced, obviously, in the wounding and the damage and the profound impacts of colonization. But what we need to remember is what I call the trail on the ground, that even if I come from a German background, if I go deep enough into that history, I find my indigenous roots. And I may not remember the actual expressions of those practices, rituals, languages, intimacies with landscape and ancestors. It's still in my being in some way. Carl Jung talked about the unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. And when we do rituals together, at the end of it, there is this odd feeling of familiarity. Even though we've never done anything like this before, there's a recognition somehow in the psyche that this is the resonance. This is the cadence that allowed our people to survive and to not only survive, but to create a rich spiritual heritage. And so part of my grief is to feel that much of that heritage has been forgotten. And we need to grieve into that over and over and over again. I think the reparations, the repair, has to go through the threshold of sorrow, and recognizing what I persistently encounter, which is the emptiness of white society, white tradition. We have emptied out. We have lost what would have allowed us to feel connected to one another, to place, to land. And so maybe when we arrived in this country 500 years ago, we wouldn't have done the same patterns because we would have felt already a kinship to place and an invitation for a relationship. That's not what we came here with. We came here empty, and we responded to the cultures that were here by emptying them, or trying to anyhow. And that's what colonization did. So I'll just stop there. And Orland.
Very, very insightful. Thank you, Francis. And thanks for the question, Zaya and Mauricio. The history in which we are situated is a bracket in a certain way of the human experience within existence. Right? So we're exploring in our history, our existence with life. Prior to that search or making sense of existence, we had an experience that continued to flow from the source. Source was never interrupted to the consciousness field in which the rituals that were held by humanity provided a container for the ongoing evolution of reality, for the continuation of the natural forces through human, say, witnessing of its miracles and magic. And so the human being did not have to do anything for what was happening within those spheres, right? The rituals were to actually receive more of what was coming from creation and allowing it to stay within its flow. Human beings, as you said, forgot some very fundamental relationship to that natural reality and fell into existence as a separate reality. And this is the critical point. What happened in some part of human evolution and consciousness in which existence became a search for self-interest, self-survival, and a certain way parameters between what was the edge of the known reality and the mysteries that continue to be true. And so different cultures had different edges of what we call reality. Mm-hmm. And for the Western mind that intellectualized the world to the degree in which everything was named based on our experience with it, created more of a forgetting about its purpose within the larger ecology through which memory continued to flow. And so colonization occurred in the very people who colonized the rest of the world by naming it or renaming it inconsistent with its nature, because they had forgotten the rituals of belonging to their own ancestral memory and locations of culture. This intellectualization in which the mind pursued existence and not the experience of the mysteries is the result of the kind of civilization we're in and the harms that are caused by our forgetting. And so there is a grief that has been happening in the institutionalized cultural memory of those who have colonized the world, because what they're searching for is the sacred, but could not recognize it even in their own presence. And to try to perfect the world to be more like how I think about it is actually the colonization process. Because thinking cannot create the reality that is to be known, what the ancients call the mysteries. And it definitely cannot think nature. Nature has to be felt, we cannot think nature. And to think in the Western empiricism in consciousness is to forget. Mostly.
Think is to forget. Mm. Mm. Orland, may I?
Please.
I heard you speak of an inner space where only the stars can reach. We know that space when we're in the deepest lament, in the deepest undercurrents of grief, when our world was disrupted by some crisis. And Francis, in your words, you speak of we become alive at the threshold of grief and loss and revelation. Could could you speak of that portal that grief offers? And if we can, and how I don't like questions how, but this is the mind, right? Just to recognize it, say hi, and how do we metabolize grief? And yeah, and let it be a medicine.
I would imagine the first move is to begin to examine our own mistrust of grief. And part of our fear and mistrust of sorrow is that we have been conditioned to encounter it alone. And in isolation, we can't possibly open to the full spectrum of sorrows that are around us. So the heart wisely shuts down. There's a wisdom to our own capacities to numb, to avoid, to anesthetize. And I don't judge that at all, because the conditions that we're asked to live within are so fragmented and so isolated. So what I've been working with for the last many decades is to try to reanimate the original matrix within which we can begin to build faith in grief again. That when it's held communally, when it's held in ritual space, when it's given, Orland, talked about the containment field, when that's present, the psyche recognizes the resonant signature is there. So this is the proper space for me to open and empty the cup of my sorrow. But without that signal frequency, it's very hard to move the sorrow. So what happens typically is that we begin to compact grief. People come into my practice and talk about feeling depressed. And as I'm sitting with them, it really is not depression, it's oppression. It's the weight of undigested grief, not just their own, but generations of sorrow that has accumulated in the heart, in the soul, and has created this state of weightiness, heaviness, that we can barely move through our life. So part of what we need is to, again, build our faith that grief isn't here to take us hostage. It's actually one of the most evident displays of our aliveness and our love, because grief is so entangled with love and affection. We grieve because something we love has been harmed or lost or has been dismissed or dishonored, and we grieve that. So I think partly we begin to need to also give permission to one another to go there. People often ask, well, how do I do this? How do I begin to engage my grief? Well, I say invite 2 or 3 people into your home and say, tonight the topic is loss. But let's just make some agreements. We're not here to fix a damn thing. Grief isn't a problem to be solved. It's a presence awaiting witnessing. And when we witness grief, we warm it. There's an old alchemical principle that says that the material in the vessel must be kept warm in order for it to continue to move and evolve. But when we approach our grief with coldness, it congeals and hardens and does not move. So our first move is to bring warmth to this territory, to bring compassion, to bring kindness, to bring attention, affection, so that this place might begin to often, soften and then be allowed to move and be shared with others. Grief wants company. Our grief has always been communal. From the time human beings began to gather, grief has been shared communally. And now, under the weight of individualism, colonialism, capitalism, we've been forced to carry it alone. So I think we need to find our way back into small circles where we can touch the edges of our sorrow and make a discovery that our grief is entangled with one another's grief, that our grief is mutual. It's not my grief. I may have a particular expression of that sorrow, but we share a communal cup of grief. And we need to gather together so our cup can continue to be emptied, not just for personal benefit, so that I might love this world more ardently. So I might be able to bring love into the streets and to the faces of the young ones I meet on the street. This isn't about, I guess, I love what Orland said about, the kind of what David Hinton calls the relentless industry of self. That I'm not here just to make myself feel better when I go to a grief ritual. I'm here so my heart can be more spacious, more capable of falling in love with this world. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
And I think that's the source of my reflection would be this point of how do we make love more abundant? Right? Something has to be taken away from us in order for the making of love more abundant. It is not a given. We can't be given the love that we have to give to the world. It has to be self-generated. So this is the part of the self that I think it's worth investing in. That the area where our will has to overcome the withholding of love and one can say interest in the future, where we may have to include those who have violated our civility, our humanity. Can we create a world in which, even if it's an imagination first, in which those people who have done harm can coexist with a different impulse of our creative effort? In most creation stories, the world is given in a way that allows us to receive everything we need. And most creation stories don't include the things that the gods know will happen, which is the betrayal. And we are left alone to figure out what to do in the space where I can only give something that the gods will not give me. A free creative act. So here's the thing. We're given this in the film, a beautiful story of this world of nature given to humanity, cultural rituals to hold it. And then a human being shows up from somewhere and take it all away. What is that? What is that reality there? How could a human being take away what the gods have given us? And if so, in most, you say, wisdom traditions, they start a fire and they gather around that and ask what parts of the initiation were not given. And then the elders figure out how to design a way for people to forgive the betrayals of the culture, which also includes themselves. The wisdom keepers don't hold all knowing. They hold the processes of investigating something that has to come into the culture as new and help to evolve the ethics of integrity and to the faithful remaking of community to include the harm that was caused as well. Most rituals that we now have, including grief rituals, because one can say grief is the abundant darkness that was not put into light when light was given and when love was given and when nature was given. Grief stayed at the back and had to come through human interaction with each other. It's one of the archetypes that never stays. It's too abundant to stay in any form of attachments that we have. And so the critical part of it, if we try to think logically that we will frame grief and we will protect ourselves by how we think about it, it's not going to happen. A betrayal will happen again and again and again and again, because this reality is what allows us to begin again. Human beings must become accustomed to beginning again. Inheritances of all kinds that becomes institutionalized or even ceremonialized sets us up for another betrayal. Because we have to remake a relationship to the sacred. It's just a way of ritual. And we've accumulated so much grief in the interactive space of our human cultural realities that one can say it is far more, say, potentially resourceful as all the currencies that we interact with in our world. And yet we are still leaving it behind the same way the gods did. We are leaving grief behind because we think if we give it to each other, we will risk losing this inner trust. But it's something that we have to forgive as well, in order for it to move. And in a film, you see by the time we progress through the healing process, it brings us back to the very things that Francis have mentioned: forgiveness, love, and a certain way, the freedom, because someone actually died and saw what their death means on the other side of life. This body is protecting us from giving and forgiving. And the feeling is that if I forgive or love, I'm betraying my body. And so there's a tendency to withhold it. But the body has to be healed to be a creator in our physical world, to be a healer in our physical world, to be a giver in our physical world. The body has to keep evolving the power of creation itself.
Francis, you speak, I heard you speak often that we are entering the long dark. These times are calling us, or it's another cycle of the long dark. It's not the first one. And what does that mean? How? And you also say this is not a time for hope. It's a time to practice and develop faith.
Yeah, I might amend that a little bit, but I'm not opposed to hope.
Entering the long dark.
The long dark, yes.
And then
what I mean,
agree on, yeah.
What's that, Zaya?
Go ahead.
Well, what I mean by the long dark is that we have been on an ascension run for about 3,000 or 4,000 years, trying to rise above, to control, to dominate, to master the planet and each other to some degree. Well, my sense is that the soul of the world, the anima mundi, is now taking us down. We are headed down, I think, for a prolonged period of descent. We are heading downward into the underworld, into the shadowed lands. This is not a time of confidence and rising. It's not a time of ease and growth. We are in the via negativa. We're in the decline. We're in what the alchemists would call the negredo, the blackening, the darkening. And this is a holy time when things decay, break down, break apart, and we need to see many things that have been institutionalized break down. Systemic racism must break down. Economic disparities must break down. Gender judgments and denials must break down. So we're in a period where we're watching things break apart and collapse, and it can terrify us. The long dark is just that. It's long. I'm talking at least 2 generations. If we make it to the far side of that time, we might see a emergent sense of living culture again. But it's going to be a rough ride. It's going to be difficult. But this is the times that we've been brought into. And I think this is the time when we are being asked to ripen as mature human beings. Because I love what Orland was saying, but part of what is required of us to respond this way is that we emerge into our adult self. Trauma and uncertainty can activate very young parts of us, and we can go into survival modes. We can contract. We can deny. We can push away. We can withhold. We can strategize. But we are at a threshold time in our collective life where we're being asked through initiation to emerge into our adult self, to show up for what is being asked of us at this time. This is not going to be an easy time. I wrote the preface for a book called Choosing Earth a couple of years ago by Dwayne Elgin. And Dwayne has been working with understanding global dynamics and patterns for many, many decades. And so he wrote this book looking at the next 5 decades. And from what he can gather from all of the research, what those 5 decades might consist of probabilities. And they were hard. The level of loss, death, and suffering is going to be strong. And so I had to write something about for this. What do you say when you're looking at that kind of forecast? And what I came to was that, yes, we have entered the long dark. This is a rough initiation. Most initiations, when they're held traditionally, are what I would call a sustained encounter or a contained encounter with death. A rough initiation is an uncontained encounter with death. That we don't have the elders typically. We don't have the rituals. We don't have the community. We don't have the ground that's been sanctified and made sacramental. Most of us don't have access to that. But nature itself is initiating us. We've been taking into the exact conditions of initiation, where the ordinary world is falling apart, where our sense of identity is being challenged, and where the recognition is emerging that we can never go back to the world that was. We are being pushed to the edge of transformation. I have a helicopter going overhead. I hope that's not too distracting. Anyway, long dark. This is the time where I said about hope. What I meant by that was kind of the naive hope that we could bypass the trouble. But genuine activated hope means I trust that what is happening has intentionality behind it. This has to happen. And we can either participate in it or we can be rolled by it. So that's the invitation, I think, for each of us to ripen up enough to say, how do I respond? I remember giving a talk up in Canada some years ago, and towards the end of it, a young woman stood up and asked the question, so what's the answer? How do we fix this? I said, there is no answer, but there's a response. And every one of us must decipher our response to the conditions that we're in, because every one of us carries medicine. Every one of us is necessary for these times. And there's not one of you on the screen that is superfluous. We need you. We need your medicine. We need your gifts. But that means being in the adult, because only the adult can deliver the blessing. The child will always be in a position of contraction and potential fear. So I hope I responded to the long dark adequately there for you.
And I wonder, Orland, would you use as well? Do you see that we are entering a long dark? We've entered already. Is that a way you would describe these times as well?
Yeah, I would I agree that the age of I believe that something will save me has ended. Right? The idea that our belief is rooted in an external hope for something, to the internal hope that was just articulated. The shadow is the hope. If we hope to understand our shadow, we'll actually gain more wisdom about what has been accumulating in the collective and personal unconscious of our lives, right? The human being has been receiving something that nature cannot give us, which is our shadow. Nature doesn't give us our shadow. Human interaction gives us our shadow. Whether we make our motives transparent or not, that's what gives us our shadow. We've accumulated a lot of self-doubt. We've accumulated a lot of wounds, personal, family, societal wounds. This is the inner darkness that will become the resource for a new civilization, a new kind of enlivened and enlightened humanity, because we have to agree on sharing something that is becoming far more abundant, because it will never end in the way that we think it will end, that some other being will save us from ourselves. Right? We are creating ourselves for the first time. We're receiving something from each other that is not given by the divine ones. The act of will is really the critical part of our humanity now, to say, if we're to enter into a shared reality, how transparent do we have to be? How revealing of my intention do I have to be? And am I choosing abundance at a level in which I will include you? The challenge of our world is the fact that we are now in the tension between scarcity and abundance. And it's getting harder for us to choose abundance because we don't want to include other people in it.
Okay.
Right? This is the darkness. It's not even darkness, it's a limitation of our will effort to understand that the personal unconscious is now becoming the collective unconscious. We'll have in ourselves all the trauma, which is a good thing in the end, because it is actually a substance that requires to enter into our life to be transformed. It will not stop. There will be no psychology for trauma to the degree in which I can predict behavior and preferences of my own survival. We've already crossed the space in which we are in a shared reality, but we're sharing the shadow first. And means that if the shadow is to become enlivened with purpose, we have to understand the nature of abundance, which is, what is beginning? What does beginning mean for us? If we think the body is only inherited, only a kind of inherited space, we're not understanding our bodies. The body does not only have genetics in it, it has interests in it. And an interest is in diversity of feelings, diversity of relationships. That is our ecology in consciousness. Just like nature has its ecology with all beings that makes nature, we have to do it with the unconsciousness of our shared lives and develop a discipline of integrating it into consciousness, bringing our unconscious into conscious. So this is the effort of adequating our will in relationship to the crisis in our world. Because we have to create a governance model in which abundance is true, the way nature speaks it. the things that we're talking about is not nature. We're talking about our human will, in which we're really not willing to be human at a level in which we can express creation in its fullest. And it still is a mystery. I mean, I don't know how we'll do that unless we sit down and ask, what do you need from me to come into your fullness of being? Because I can figure out what to give of myself rather than trying to take my will unconsciously through manipulations and all kinds of things, putting me to sleep so that you can have my will. That is not the age of humanity. Consent is the age of humanity. You have to ask, how can your will change my life? It's a new ritual. We've never done that.
Just checking, Francis, I know you need to leave earlier. I have one more question. Do you have time to answer, or you need to leave before we come?
Oh, we can't hear you.
Yes, I can certainly respond to one more question.
Yeah, please do. Yes.
And I just, about the abundance, Orland, like that's one thing we heard again and again, the Indigenous people, the way they understood abundance and wealth was when was shared. Wealth is only wealth when can be shared. Those who can share are the most abundant one, the most rich. And we have forgotten and replaced that story with the wealth that cannot be shared. Yeah. In the film, we speak about ancestors and ancestral wisdom. And what we're feeling is like there is that collective longing for all of us to remember the ancestral ways, to connect with the ancestors. Could you speak about what does that mean? How do we listen to those who have come before us and to those who are ahead of us that are also ancestors? And yesterday we heard from our Maori friends that ancestor can be also the wind, and it's not only humans, it's not only the human, it could be also a dream, could be an ancestor. But I wonder how you too could speak of that. Yeah. About
I'll just respond briefly. First of all, the challenge frequently is that, particularly in modernity, our focus is on progress. It's always looking towards the next thing. In a sense, we have abandoned the ancestors. Remember one of Carl Jung's works when he was working on the Red Book. He would spend most every night down in his basement writing. And basically what he began to discover, what he was writing were the laments of the dead. That what the dead want was to be remembered. What the dead wanted was to not be abandoned and forgotten, but to see and to be included in our day-to-day lives, because they certainly are part of this flesh, part of this body, part of my imagination, part of how I dream. But for many folks, what I've encountered in my work is that the relationship to the ancestors has been so harsh and difficult that they want to turn away from that. And so one of the things that you just mentioned, what I totally agree with, is that the ancestors are everything that has gone before us. Everything that has gone before us is an ancestor. For me, my soul lineage is more potent than my blood lineage. So my soul lineage is, James Hillman and Carl Jung, and on and on and on down into Indigenous mind. That's my ancestral line, and I count on them every day for support, for encouragement, for insight, for dreaming. The fantasy of individualism oftentimes neglects and negates our relationship to the invisible world. So part of our work again now in this time is to open up to that, the filaments of connection to the invisible world, to the unseen, to the ancestral. I have felt more support from my ancestors now than I ever have in my life. And I'm finding that they're invested in what we're doing. When we're gathering for grief rituals, you can feel their presence in the room, that we're not just grieving our own grief. Like I said before, we're grieving generations and generations of unwept tears. And the healing, then, I think, what I also felt in the film was the healing is going in all directions. Past, present, future, above, below. The healing is touching all of that. And as my friend Malidoma Some would say, we're here to unkink the hose so that the flow from the ancestors into our life is free-flowing and not encumbered by past traumas and wounds. But we're here to help mend those through our grieving, through our ritual acts, through our acts of repair. We're here to honor the ancestors by living fully in this moment. So, and sadly, I have to leave you all today, my friends.
Yeah. Francis, thank you so much for the inspiration of that. Yeah.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, Orland. As we were saying before we got on to talk, we've walked very close together apart, and now now we can feel a little more of our actual kinship. So thank you.
Yes, welcome.
And thank you, Zaya and Maurizio.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
So much.
And thank all of you for being here today. Again, this is all the work that we are being called to do, and I'm delighted to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your medicine, Francis. Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Wow, the time. And
We have,
we have 5 minutes.
We can squeeze 5 more.
Orland, what would you say about soul as the connection between the self and the ancestors? Or is that how do you?
I remember in conversations with some elders in South Africa that the ancestors are, one can say, ancestral memory. But memory was the first word before we changed it to ancestor. Mysteries had to do with memory. So the mysteries were the ancestors as well, not only the biological forms through which the ancestral memory became realized. So memory is constituted in the very nature of our creative form. And we're trying to work in other levels of memory at different stages of development. So initiation was designed to put more memory into the human being. If we look at embryology at different stages, every month in the developmental cycle of the embryo, a certain complexity of design happens in which more creative potential comes for that individual developing being. And the last stage is a kind of, which happens after birth. In the first 3 years, we develop the capacity to communicate not only with the biological parent and culture that we are in, but the ancestral world. The child stays as a link to all that came before, and then has to make a sacrifice. How much of that to forgive and forget in order to be with our way of thinking about reality? And so we acculturate them to come here and be here with us and leave these other communications behind. This again is really what we're trying to ask. How much more memory needs to come in? So the soul, in its wisdom, does something for both spirit and body. It creates a sacred hospitality for the collective need that our world has, which is to go back into the unconscious and recover the memory. But we have to pass through the labyrinth of trauma, of our unutilized creative forces. This is really what we're seeing as a fundamental need after we call intergenerational trauma. Well, we are born to be intergenerational. We are born to be interdimensional. So in a way, all of these challenges are asking us again, what is it that we want to remember? And how could we situate ourselves in a space in which we make our feeling more trustworthy of the labyrinth of the soul and not only spirit and body? As Francis was saying, the soul has depths of creativity that comes more through a cognitive feeling. And in a certain way, just like if we don't have these outer senses orienting us to the world, there's an intuitive feeling that I'm still alive. And this is the spark of creativity. It's not avoiding life, is living into the very spark, one can say, is the star wisdom that continues to guide us through the darkest of our times. And that is the ancestor. It doesn't go out. The soul is our ancestors that connects us to all ancestors within times past and future. And we know them not by name, but by the capacity that if I make contact with them, their qualities will be released in me. That has always been the nature of initiation, and it will continue to be so.
We take away all the specific lineage, right? That we have. Oh, this is my lineage. Right? It takes away that. It becomes a universal ancestry that will allow us to they will allow us to go forward as one together, regardless of our diversity, cultural, whatever. Beautiful. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So much to sit with. Wow. Wow.
And thanks for the gift of the eternal song. What a statement for our time to have viewings for. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was our initiation. It was medicine that came through us.
It is.
And we are still learning with the film.
Yes.
It's the gift we receive that we share.
Wow.
Wow. I'm so glad, Orland, we could make this possible. And thank you for expanding so much the container and in reminding us that there is of the mystery that has started billions of years ago that carries us forward. Yeah.
Because I was seeing always the ancestry. Yeah, I started before we started the movie. It was my grandparents were my ancestors. Then when the movie started to become, the ancestors I don't know. And now what you're framing it is even another layer. It's not even the ancestor. Is ancestry is a common field in which we exist.
Mystery that carries
is the mystery that carries us. So yeah, when you try to look for my ancestor, no, I just simply have to be. And
here.
And listen. Yeah.
Wow.
Gratitude for them.
So much love for you both and the community that is holding this space together.
There were also many, many questions. If you would be open to address a few. Thank you so much.
Oh, please. Yes.
Oh, this is it. What do you mean something has to be taken away for love? Doesn't love have to grow and expand and transform?
There's a feeling that we carry with achievements that gives us an underlining separation from giving attention. Attention and intention becomes challenged when we can't integrate the feeling that I am loving what I do instead of just having what I do. Authority, the ego is invested in a certain kind of authority in which the more I get, the more I think I'm better than how I got it. Right? We don't know the effort of the personal and collective unconscious. We think we achieve our goals by ourselves or through some intellectual thought process. And we give this feeling a space, the feeling of, some people call it self-righteousness.
Mm.
It's a challenge when everything is going right for us. We have to be careful that we don't become disillusioned by right stuff. It can become an illusion over time, because the mysteries are not when things are going right, is to make a search, to make actually a sacrifice for something that has to go back into the world. So we have joy in us at the deepest level. And the grief and struggle makes us negotiate how we bring that out of ourselves. Joy doesn't come from the outside. It's the end of grief. It's the last stage of grief in which something of our hearts open up, and I realize my solitude and solace is actually something I give to the world. So this is, I may not be saying it completely. It's a feeling that we can't basically give to someone or ask someone to think it. It's what they create out of themselves. And this particular part of the ongoing evolution in consciousness, particularly in a civilization where the egoity wants to be right, this could also be harmful to the creative act of giving without a reason, sacrificing without a reason. We want to be reasonable too much about everything. It's not going to keep us from feeling the need of a certain kind of inadequacy. But the inadequacy is not the fact that I'm wrong, is that I have to give something out of true freedom. I'm only adequate to my freedom. And this is a kind of justice that we are trying to create a space for in our world, because there's no measure of punishment for a particular act. There is no measure. So we can say any injustice that has happened, this is the punishment. We can't truly measure that. One can say the full act of justice is beginning the world again.
Is beginning?
Beginning the world, coming back to a place in which I feel free again.
Yeah.
And the thing that gives us most times is people who come from a near-death experience. They have a complete reformation of the world reality. a peacefulness, and it was shared in the film, a peacefulness in which that moment when I surrender everything, including my body and will, and something replaces it in a fraction of a moment, and an inner resolve comes. This is really what I'm calling grief. It's a creative act when nothing else works.
It acts when nothing else works.
Everything can be reshaped. Yeah. And you have a question just to carry on that. Again, in modernity, we have forgotten the technology of ritual, of ceremony, going past the understanding. And you're speaking of grief as an initiation that invites that. Could we remember the way of the ceremony or the way of the ritual? Is that part of the remembering that we echo into?
Yeah. The one thing sorry, go ahead. Please.
Yeah.
The one thing that we're taught to observe in a ritual one can say depends on our attentiveness, our attention. So the ritual starts with an intention. And in a way, because we've lost the formality of traditions and traditional knowledge of rituals, we might feel we don't have the knowing of how to do a ritual. One way of doing it is to say, I don't know how to do this ritual, and you're in the ritual. When we say, I don't know, we start up to observe what begins to happen. What begins to happen? So I start with this particular revelation or sacrifice. That's a sacrifice to say, I don't know. It gives up the ego. It gives up the parts of ourselves that wants to be in control. And then when we observe the beings that come in to make reality, that's when the ritual starts.
Mm.
They put us back together. They put back memory together. A song might be recovered in that moment. But if we keep holding, I don't know, and keep focusing on the self, there is no ritual. There's no ritual in me becoming smarter. That's not a ritual. Becoming more powerful, that's not a ritual. The ritual is the relationship between the beings who come to help remake the agreement powers that can give us everything. But it's a way of respecting the fact that they're beings that give us our reality in co-creation of our longing for something. And we begin to see how creation happens.
Mm.
And sometimes it requires a little patience to just let them do their work until they become perceptible to us. But if I'm focusing my ego of I'm not getting enlightened, that is like not a ritual. Or I'm not getting healed because I'm not in relationship to the right ancestors. That's not the ritual. Wow. We cannot put not before the beings who come to help.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Mm.
Yeah, you're adding such a different layer. Like
Kia ora, Orland. Your wisdom speaks to my soul. Why does ego and insecurity prevents me from giving abundantly to others, myself, and the world around me in my soul? I want to, but I feel like I'm losing something when I think about giving genuinely. Where do I begin transforming? Wailata rifle. Aotearoa.
Yeah. Oh, that question is at my heart all the time. to dissolve the, and this is against scarcity and abundance in our civilization, in which my feeling is diminishing me. My feeling of oppression is diminishing my will to be generous. And I have to correct that. I have to say to myself, this feeling is not me. These thoughts that someone has taken something from me is not me. That may have occurred, but I'm responsible for abundance. I'm responsible for the part of me that dies to that feeling as a genuine sacrifice to the sphere of eternal songs. If I don't make that sacrifice, that I have to give my will back to the songs and not to the struggle for correct action between me and the oppressor, I don't live. I don't get to live. Mm. My body doesn't belong to this world. It belongs to the spiritual world. It's here so that I can bring the spiritual world here and forgive what happens here. Transform what happens here. There are no rewards here for the human being. Our life is the afterlife. Our life is memory. And I'm responsible for creating right memory of who I am. I don't let the oppressors determine my memory.
Yes.
They're not supposed to create my memory. Mm-hmm. They might create my struggle, but my struggle is not my memory. My struggle has to be taken up into a dialogue between me and other beings who are giving me their wisdom of how to come back into the world every day and be generous with myself and others. Why should I withhold my life because someone resents me? No, absolutely not. I share with some friends, I don't wake up in racism every day. I wake up before racism and then come into it as my work. It is my work to understand the institutions of this world, but I don't live there. I don't live in that. I don't get life from that. I get my work from it. But my life belongs to the eternal songs, the wisdom of creation. And so I have to make that choice. Everyone has to make that choice for themselves. What dynamics of shared realities we're going to be engaging with. And if we put all ourselves into this field of the physical world and existence, we will feel oppressed, because that itself is a forgetting of the nature of reality and how it works within the human soul. And in a certain way, we have to keep reimagining the world without these oppressions in them, because that is a healthy worldview. Mm. They don't always change it in the same time we want it to change, but this is where help comes.
Wow. I can't stop myself to feel like you're opening a portal, and that portal is carrying us to the next conversation. There is no doubt here. It's wide open, and yes.
And we need to give a break to humans, so they can get a bio break, because then they will be 2 in a row. 5 minutes break.
And the next conversation is with Maori elders who talk about exactly to remember ourselves all the way to the stars, and that colonialism cannot that take away.
Yeah, it's
such a beautiful segue
intro,
opening the portal to continue to listen to the ancestors. This is it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Orland.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Orland.
Orland.